Now, it's over 5 years after the Life Esidimeni tragedy, and a formal inquest into the death of 144 psychiatric patients under the care of the Gauteng Health Department will start at the Pretoria High Court in July. The decision was made by Judge Teffo in a meeting with the National Prosecuting Authority, family representatives and legal representatives and NGOs. Now, it's hoped that the inquest will actually get to the bottom of the circumstances that led to the death of mental health care patients. In an interview that we did yesterday with Life Esidimeni Family Committee member Christine Ngumalo and social activist Mark Haywood, government's actions or the lack thereof since the tragedy were called into question. So this morning, Thabo Masebe, who is the Gauteng Provincial Government's Acting Director General, joins us to talk about their response to this tragedy. Mr. Masebe, thanks for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, Sakina. Good morning.
Let me first just gauge the reaction of the Gauteng Provincial Government to the announcement of the inquest to kick off in July.
Well, we're happy that that matter is now going to be finalized. As government, we're also going to be participating in the inquest. There are some government officials that have been subpoenaed to participate in the hearings. So we will fully cooperate with the process. We are indeed happy that it is finally taking place.
So I'm not sure if you actually saw that interview yesterday that we did with Christine Ngumalo, family representative of the people who lost members of their families during the Esidimeni tragedy, and Mark Haywood, who's an activist. And basically, they were not happy with the lack of action from the Gauteng provincial government in light of previous assurances by the Gauteng Premier that government is actually committed to holding those who were fingered in wrongdoing in the arbitration process to account. What has happened since then, Mr. Masebe? Has anybody been held accountable?
Yes, Sakina, government has done all what it could do. If you recall, Sakina, the whole the report, all these actions that we are taking stem from the report of Professor Makhuba, who did the investigation in 2016. After his investigation, he did present his report, and the Premier did, upon receipt of the report, made a commitment to implement all the recommendations. There were a number of recommendations which were directed at the Gauteng Provincial Government. Some were directed at the national government. So we did all the things that were directed at us, and those included taking disciplinary action against any officials that were cited in the report. All those officials did indeed face disciplinary action. Some of them chose to leave the department, and there were other processes that were also taken, including reporting those that belong to professional bodies to such professional bodies. All that was done by the government. So we have fully acted, and we're really taken by surprise why when the accusation was made that we have not acted in accordance with the report of Professor Makhuba and the arbitration award given by Justice Moseneke.
So, Family Committee member Christine Ngumalo, she charged that there's been very little communication from government side. What's your response to that?
I also don't know. We are in communication with them on all the matters. The last thing that we have to do relates to the monument, which is also part of Professor Makhuba's recommendation, and Justice Moseneke also mentioned it in his award. In that regard, we, both government and the families' representatives, agreed that we are not looking at just a symbolic monument, but rather we should look at a living monument. And what we mean by that is that we should create a facility similar to Life Esidimeni, which will be run by government, to ensure that we give quality care to the mental health care users. There's full agreement on that, and that is what we are now working on, and details of that will be announced soon.
So that takes care of the monument, where obviously you are in agreement. But in terms of just communicating with the affected families, how do you do that? When was the last time that you were actually in touch with them, Mr. Masebe?
Well, they have a committee. Remember what we are doing here. The Premier is implementing the reports of the investigation and the award given by Justice Moseneke. But with regard to the ongoing communication between the Department of Health as the responsible department and the family members of the mental health care users, there are processes that were set in place, and we believe those processes continue to work. The Premier does not run the Department of Health, but obviously, should there be any problems, he's always available to listen to such and ensure that such problems are resolved. So as far as we are concerned, all the processes are in place in the health department, and they continue to work. So we're not aware of any lack of communication or information being provided.
So if that does in fact exist, should that be brought to your attention?
Of course, yes, and we'll attend to it immediately.
All right, I'll take you up on that. The other matter with regard to the recommendations, you spoke of, the disciplinary processes unfolding, some people having left the department, others perhaps moving to other departments. Let's talk about that. How many people were actually fired because of what happened at Life Esidimeni, considering, of course, that 144 people actually lost their lives as a result of this particular tragedy?
Well, Sakina, if you recall, the first person that was mentioned was the MEC, and the Premier acted on that, and actually she resigned she would have been released from her position. And there were two senior officials, the former head of department and the director of mental health. Both of them were, a disciplinary process was underway, and they decided to resign. And then there were a number of junior officials in the department who were also cited. They were all taken through disciplinary processes and given various sanctions. But of course, the recommendation of the DC, which was chaired by an independent officer, did not recommend that they should be fired. So we acted on the recommendations, and various penalties were meted out to those officials.
What sort of penalties?
Well, there were various. Some of them received a final written warning. Some were transferred to other areas, and so on. So we did act in accordance to the recommendations made by the disciplinary committees, which were chaired by independent adjudicators.
Speaking of people being transferred to other areas, let's talk about that, Mr. Masebe. Who, as an example, would have moved to another area, and why? If people are facing disciplinary processes in one area, on what basis do you get to move them to another?
No, transfer, Sakina, might actually mean a demotion. Remember, disciplinary hearing only deals with the conduct of the person as an employee. So you deal with all those issues, and normally they are chaired, as I said, they are adjudicated by independent people who look at the case presented by the government and give the people who are accused a hearing to speak for themselves, to state their case. And at the end, a decision is made, and recommended penalties would then be issued to government, and government will have to act on those. So it is not an automatic thing to say once officials are put through a disciplinary process, they will then be fired. We're looking at the conduct of people here. We're not dealing with the criminality. The issue of whether anybody may have committed crime, that will be dealt with by the courts. As you are aware, when we started this discussion, you spoke about the inquest that is now set for the 19th of July. That will determine if anybody's conduct could be deemed to be unlawful in terms of the law. Government was merely dealing with the issue of employer-employee relations in the workplace.
Yeah. Mr. Masebe, we're out of time, but just a quick one. How many people were demoted? And in terms of the compensation, have all the families been paid?
I don't have the full list of the officials here. I only dealt with the senior officials. But in terms of the compensation, after the hearing, Justice Moseneke gave us a list of 134 people. All of them received their compensation.
Well, we have to leave it there, but thanks for your time this morning, Mr. Thabo Masebe, Acting Director General for the Gauteng Provincial Government, reacting to the NPA's announcement on that inquest into the Life Esidimeni tragedy and also some of the allegations levelled yesterday on this show. So we're going to take a quick break. We're going to have to say goodbye to our SABC 2 viewers after this.